So, for the fifth night in a row, American warplanes hit targets inside Iran. Not a symbolic strike, not a one-off, 5 nights. And at the same time, 3,000 miles of Iranian coastline just went dark for commercial shipping because the United States Navy put it there. Most people are watching this as a story about bombs, but the real story is about something quieter, a blockade designed to bleed a country's economy dry without a single formal declaration of war. Here's what's actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now, and why the next 60 days might matter more than the last 5 months combined. To understand what's happening this week, you have to go back 4.5 months. On February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated operation. Washington called its share of it Operation Epic Fury, hitting Iranian nuclear sites, missile bases, and military command in under 12 hours, nearly 900 strikes. In the opening wave, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed along with dozens of senior commanders. Iran responded within hours. Missiles and drones fired at Israel and at American bases across the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that carries roughly a fifth of the world's oil, was effectively shut down by Iranian forces the same day. That's the part everyone remembers. Here's the part that gets lost. For the next 4 months, this war moved in cycles. A ceasefire in April that mostly held, then collapsed in early June, when Iran struck American bases across the Gulf again and declared Hormuz fully closed. Then, on June 14th, a 14-point memorandum negotiated with Qatar and Pakistan as go-betweens was signed digitally, then signed again on paper in Versailles. 3 days later, the U.S. lifted its naval blockade on June 18th. A separate Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire followed the next day. For about 3 weeks, it looked like this war was actually ending. Then came July 8th. At the NATO summit, President Trump said publicly that he considered the truce over, and on July 13th, in a post on Truth Social, he went further, declaring unilateral American control over the Strait of Hormuz and reinstating the naval blockade of Iranian ports. His words, the strait, quote, will remain open with or without Iran. Since then, 5 straight nights of strikes, the blockade back in force, and a threat, bridges, power plants next week, unless Tehran comes back to the table. Now let me explain how this actually works, because a naval blockade in 2026 doesn't look anything like what you're picturing. Hi, my name is David Whitmore. Hope you're doing well. Come for the naval blockade, stay for the tanker. Nobody was supposed to notice. What officially happened? Let's start with the official version, because it's straightforward enough. CENTCOM says the blockade exists to stop Iran from using the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon, both to choke global oil supply and to fund its military. Commander Brad Cooper told reporters that in the week before the blockade went back up, Iran had attacked 7 commercial vessels, leaving roughly a dozen crew members dead, missing, or injured. So on paper, this is a defensive measure to protect shipping lanes. And here's the first concrete result. On Wednesday, the U.S. Navy disabled an oil tanker, the Belma, flagged in Curaçao, as it tried to reach Karg Island, which handles the vast majority of Iran's oil exports. CENTCOM says the ship ignored repeated warnings. It's the first vessel disabled since the blockade came back into effect on Tuesday. That's layer 1. Now here's where it gets more interesting. What the fine print actually says, here's what most coverage buried. This isn't actually the first time this blockade has existed this year. The U.S. ran an almost identical blockade from April 13th to May 29th, nearly 7 weeks, and we have real numbers on what it did. By CENTCOM's own count, it intercepted 85 vessels and seized 3 ships outright. According to the shipping data firm KPLR, Iran's oil exports collapsed from close to 2 million barrels a day down to under 300,000 barrels a day in May. Al Jazeera's analysis put the resulting revenue loss at close to $6 billion. $6 billion. For a country whose foreign currency reserves were already strained by years of sanctions, that's not a dent. That's structural damage. And that's exactly why the blockade was lifted at all in June. It wasn't goodwill. It was the price of getting Iran to sign the Islamabad Memorandum in the first place. Which means what's happening right now isn't a new tool. It's the reactivation of the one tool that actually worked. What nobody is talking about. Now, hold on, because there's a financial detail here that almost nobody outside trading desks noticed. Earlier this week, Trump floated something new, a 20% reimbursement fee on all cargo passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Essentially, an American toll on the world's most important oil choke point. Brent crude spiked more than 9% in a single session on the news, briefly touching levels not seen since the April peak of the war. Then, just as fast, he dropped it. In its place, an arrangement in which Gulf states, the same governments whose tankers and economies depend on that strait staying open, commit to new investment in the United States. Follow the money for a second. A toll would have taxed every ship on Earth moving through Hormuz, allied and adversary alike. An investment pledge does something different. It turns Gulf capital into leverage the US can point to as a win without actually taxing global trade. One version makes enemies of shippers everywhere. The other buys quiet cooperation from exactly the governments: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, whose bases and airspace the US needs for this entire operation to keep functioning. That's not a coincidence. That's the blockade's financing model, what this reveals about the system. And here's the part that tells you what kind of war this actually is. This is not a war being fought primarily to occupy territory. It's a war being fought to control a price, the price of Iranian oil, and by extension, the price of Iran's ability to function as a state. Roughly 90% of Iran's external economic activity moves through or alongside the Strait of Hormuz. You don't need to invade a country like that. You need to control the door. And the retaliation confirms it. Iran isn't trying to hold ground either. It's hitting the periphery. This week alone, Iranian state media claims a strike on U.S. assets in Jordan. Kuwait says an Iranian drone hit a warehouse near an industrial area outside Mina Abdullah. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard says that warehouse was a U.S. Army logistics site. Neither side, right now, is fighting for territory. Both are fighting to make the other side's economic strategy too expensive to sustain. Now, I'm not saying this is only about oil. There's a nuclear dimension, a leadership succession dimension inside Iran, a regional proxy dimension, all still active. But I am saying that if you want to know why this war keeps escalating in the exact same place, the strait, the tankers, the ports, that's your answer. It's the one lever that visibly moves Tehran. The human and political backdrop. None of this is happening in a vacuum either. Ali Khamenei was buried on July 9th, a 6-day, 5-city state funeral that reportedly drew a combined turnout in the tens of millions across Tehran, Qom, Najaf, Karbala, and finally Mashhad. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was named the new supreme leader within days of the February strikes, and has not appeared in public since, which lines up with earlier reporting of a serious injury from that opening attack. That's a regime dealing with a leadership crisis and a funeral procession at the same time it's absorbing a second blockade. And on Tuesday, Iran's foreign ministry made its position on talks explicit. No plans for negotiations for now. There was one moment of something different this week. Trump announced that Iran released an American woman who'd been detained since December 2024. And he called it a gesture of goodwill. Small, symbolic, and worth noting. Even in the middle of a 5th consecutive night of strikes, both sides left a door open, just wide enough to walk one person through it. So, who actually wins and who loses from where things stand right now? The U.S. Treasury wins a narrow technical victory. This week, it moved to disrupt a sanctions evasion network tied to Mohammed Hossein Shamkhani, the kind of shadow shipping operation Iran has leaned on to move oil around the blockade. Every network like that they dismantle makes the blockade tighter. The Gulf states win something less obvious: leverage. By converting an American toll into an American investment pledge, they turned a policy that would have cost them money into one that costs them nothing and buys them goodwill in Washington. Iran's government loses materially. Its own numbers from the April to May blockade prove it. Exports collapsed by more than 80%, billions in revenue gone in under 2 months. That's before you count 5 more nights of strikes on top of it. And here's the loser nobody's really naming: the global consumer. Every time this blockade tightens, Brent crude jumps. It already has more than 9% in a day this week alone. Analysts have floated triple-digit oil again if this drags into autumn. That cost doesn't stay in the Gulf. It shows up at a gas pump in Ohio and a heating bill in Manchester. Zoom out, and the pattern is bigger than Iran. This is what pressure looks like in 2026. Not tanks crossing a border, but a choke point, a spreadsheet of intercepted vessels, and an economy slowly being priced out of existing. Sanctions used to be the alternative to war. Now they're being fought alongside it in real time, with warships enforcing the terms. The unresolved question is simple. Does Iran come back to a negotiating table it just said it has no plans to sit at? Or does Trump follow through on the threat to hit bridges and power plants next week? Both sides have shown over 5 months that de-escalation is possible. Both have also shown it doesn't last. You can blockade a coastline. You can't blockade a funeral procession 2 million people deep. Iran's economy is being squeezed harder than at any point since this war began. Its politics, at the same time, just buried a supreme leader in front of the largest crowds the country has seen in years. Whether that produces a government that negotiates or a government that digs in is the story that decides what August looks like. Drop your take in the comments. Does maximum pressure bring Iran back to the table, or does it just guarantee a longer war? If this gave you the full picture, the headlines didn't, share it with someone who needs it.